No, it's fine. So this coming parsha, we're gonna look ahead. When we do our classes on Wednesday, we'll look ahead.
Okay.
So this coming parsha is Chayei Sarah. Okay, we did miss the first three, which I just had I couldn't help. But
that's okay. Those are the ones I know the best. Then we start out really motivated.
Good. Okay, right. Okay, so Parshas Chayei Sarah. So I'm going to try to be very brief where we need to be brief and go into a little bit more depth than we need to. So the parsha basically discusses. We open with the death of Sarah, right? That's the first pasuk. It says the life of Sarah were 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. And then we go on to Eliezer's mission that Abraham sets him to find a mate, to find a wife for Yitzchak, the heir to the spiritual heir to the Jewish identity, the Jewish tribe. And Eliezer goes and finds Rivka, and we'll discuss in more in depth what that test is about and how she passed the test and how she was seen to be the right one. He brings her back, and at the end of the parsha, we learn that Yitzchak brought her into Sarah's tent, and then he marries her, and he's consoled for the loss of his mother. So that's basically the stuff we're going to cover now. So let's go right to the beginning of the parsha. That first pasuk is interesting because it phrases Chayei Sarah's life. It phrases it very oddly. It says, and the life of Sarah was 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. Now, when you're telling the lifespan of a person, you normally go, she lived for 127 years, right? So Rashi raises this question: what is with this wording? 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. Okay, that's the first question in the parsha. The second question is on the pasuk. The second question is that the phrase at the end of the pasuk also seems to be a bit repetitive. These were the years of the life of Sarah, and it's also worded oddly. So instead of saying 127 years, we say 100 years. So the reason is that Rashi answers that each term has to be understood independently, meaning at 100 years, she was like a woman of 20 in relation to sin, meaning that she was sin-free, because 20 is the age at which one becomes subject to heavenly punishment. Okay, so therefore, at 100, she was...
Did you say at the age of
20.
What?
At the age of 20, a person becomes subject to heavenly punishment. And so,
at the age of 100, she was
she was as sinless at 100 as she was at 20.
Got it.
And then at 20, she was as beautiful as a child of 7. Okay? So, meaning that at 7, a child, now you could say that a young woman is more beautiful than a child of 7, but the meaning here is that a child has a certain innocent, guileless, beauty, cosmetic-free, natural beauty that she had at 20. She had that quality of beauty that a child of 7 has. So that's what Rashi is saying here, that each phase of her life was comparable to the one before. Okay? The Gur Aryeh comments that each distinct period is mentioned to imply that she remained consistent throughout her life. Okay? So that's the, and again, the pasuk then repeats, these were the years of Sarah's life, meaning that
what about the 7?
I said the 7. The 7
20.
means at the age of 20, she was as beautiful as at 7.
So it's going forward. At 100,
you're using...
she was like 20.
Right. In sin.
Okay, so you're combining the 20 and the 7 together.
No.
We're saying that at 100, she was as sinless as at 20. And at 20, she was as beautiful as at 7.
Right.
And that's why the distinct numbers.
Yeah, got it. So they're combined, the 20 and the 7.
What do you mean by combined?
Because you're saying at 20, she was as beautiful as at
7. Well, it's not combining. Oh, not sure.
100.
I got
Okay,
the 100.
okay.
I got it.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're on the same page.
Yeah, we're just looking
Okay, and then again, Rashi comments about that last phrase. These were the years of the life of Sarah. It seems repetitive, redundant. It means that they were all equal in goodness and service to God. So in other words, these were the years of the life of Sarah. The years of the life of Sarah were blameless, were flawless, were perfect.
They're
Now,
all equal in what did you say? The eyes of
in goodness and service to God, that was her beauty and her dignity. Now, interesting. I don't know if you've heard this. The Midrash explains Sarah's death. Do you remember hearing what caused her death? The Midrash you do, yeah. What caused it?
What you heard about the Isaac and Abraham.
Right.
That was it.
Right.
Rivka?
Yes.
Okay.
So according to the Midrash, when the Midrash says it was Satan, actually, this is Satan, came and told her that Abraham killed your son Yitzchak on Canaan. Of course, it wasn't true. But the Midrash says that her, either from fear or sorrow, her soul left her, and that was it. She died. So it's an interesting little commentary here about this, because the implication of that seems to be that the death was accidental, right? In other words, had the Satan not come and told her this, she would have and should have lived longer. It seems to be the implication here, right? But it's not true. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky proves this can't be true. And he says like this, the proof is this. In other words, that she died at the right time. We shouldn't think that she died earlier than she should have died. Okay, so here, how does he prove it? He says like this.
Who says this?
Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky makes this proof, and he goes like this. The Talmud tells us that heredity is a factor in how long we're going to live. And therefore, the Talmud advises that you should begin to anticipate the end of your days when a person comes within 5 years of the age of the death of one of your parents. Okay? So for example, my I don't want to use people I know, but let's say one's father passed away at 80, so at 75 you should start wrapping things up, because
the truth is, and you're too young, but people my age do think that way.
Well, the Talmud tells you to, because
But you just think that way. Nobody's
right,
telling
you
to.
naturally right. Naturally, your mind
thinking
goes
that
there.
way.
Of course. So therefore, okay.
Add the water.
So if that's true, right? So the Talmud tells you should really anticipate your end of days. So the Torah tells us that Yitzchak, right, the son of Sarah, Yitzchak, when he reached the age of 123, he started looking into, thinking about giving the blessing to his oldest child, Esav, because his mother died at 127. Now, if it's true that Sarah really should have lived longer and her death was accidental, he wouldn't have drawn any conclusions from the fact that she died at 127, right? In other words, if her death was accidental and as a result of this traumatic tale, then Yitzchak would not have said, okay, I'm 123, I have to start getting things ready. So clearly it wasn't a matter of an accident. She lived her full years. But what we say is that Hashem acts naturally in the world, right? In other words, he presents us a world where things happen. They look like they're accidental, but they're not really accidental. They look like, person has a heart attack, person gets cancer, God forbid. These are natural, quote unquote, natural events. And so it can look like it was, there's an accident, God forbid. It can look accidental, but it's not. So it's an interesting thing. Okay. Yeah.
Are there commentaries on why Abraham did not tell Sarah what he was doing about the Akedah? Are there commentaries on
I'm
That's
sure.
a little problematical.
Well, not really, because when Avram was told by Hashem to get up and take your son Yitzchak, he wanted to. First of all, he didn't want to be dissuaded. He didn't want. I mean, Sarah. Let's face it. Sarah was a very powerful force in Avram's life. Sarah stood up to Abraham a couple of times, right? She took very decisive action, as we're going to talk about later. She told Abraham, take Hagar, my maidservant, for a wife, because maybe she'll give you a son. I mean, that was a tremendous action for her to do. She told Abraham, you need to get rid of Ishmael. He's not a good influence on Yitzchak. Now, that was such a hard thing to swallow that Abraham didn't even want to listen to her until Hashem had to step in. God had to step in and say, listen to your wife. She's right here, right? So she's a very forceful person. And we're going to discuss how that contrasts with Rivka's personality. But so therefore, one minute, let me just finish. So the point is that Abraham did not want to be dissuaded. He didn't want. He was. Look, this is her son, right? Abraham has two sons at this point, Ishmael and Yitzchak. She's got one. She's got Yitzchak. And if she had known about this, if she had known that he was going to plan this trip and kill the son, based on what Hashem wanted, okay, but still, she would have. Who knows what she would have been capable of? I mean, you know what I'm saying? She didn't hear Hashem's voice telling Abraham go. He did, right? And this was his biggest test. It was a test even for him, and he had heard Hashem's voice. Imagine Sarah, who had not heard Hashem's voice telling her this, how she would have reacted. He didn't want to have to deal with any of that. He wanted to get up, and he got up early in the morning, and he goes, and that's it. He takes Eliezer, and he takes Ishmael, and he takes Yitzchak, and he goes. What did you want to say? Yeah.
That's just one argument. There's a whole other side of that.
Mm-hmm.
Are there commentaries on it that you know?
I don't know. I did not look at
them.
them. Yeah. Okay. Commentaries on why Abraham didn't.
Do another whole scenario.
Well,
And
what do you? What are your? Okay.
But
Curious what's
Okay.
the problematic?
Yeah.
that it shows a weakness in Abraham that he felt that he would be dissuaded from what God had told him to do, even though he could go back and say, "Hey, God, hey, this is what Sarah said. You think that she's smarter than me? So what's your, there's a lot of things. To me, it shows a lack of faith.
No, it's not a lack of faith in Hashem. It's a lack of faith in himself, which is why it was a test. But you have to remember that it was a test.
Himself, but I think it shows. Okay.
He was a human being after all.
He was a human being,
and he knew that again. His wife is very, very persuasive. And she was right about a lot of things. And here it is. Hashem speaks to him, instructing him what to do. He wanted to get it done.
Okay. I'm not buying it.
Okay.
I'd like to know what the comments.
Okay, I will look into it. Okay. So now there's a connection. This is also a popular.
By the way,
yeah.
I would like to underline. I am in no way judging Abraham.
That's okay.
I'm in like a little.
No, that's all right.
Compared to his greatness.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Got it. I'll look. I'll
don't
look it up.
misunderstand
No
that
problem.
I am somehow judging him.
No problem.
But I am sure there's somewhere somebody asked that question. Somebody has.
Yeah, I'm sure it's quite possible. Yeah, I can't imagine that question hasn't been asked.
Right.
Every question has been asked on every post. Okay. So getting back to Sarah's lifespan. So there is a connection between Sarah's lifespan and Queen Esther, and it's a very famous connection that's made. Do you have any idea what that connection would be? Have you heard of this before? 127 years. Anything strike you?
There's something 127 with Esther.
That's right. There's something 127 with Esther. In the Megillah, there's something is recorded as 127.
Was it?
At the very beginning of the Megillah, it says,
Have I read that Megillah?
Huh? Right. And to be fair, it's not an explicit connection with her that's made in the Megillah, but it says that Ahasuerus had ruled over 127 provinces. Okay, so how do we make this connection? The Gemara tells a story about Rabbi Akiva, that he brought it to the attention of his students. So what happened was that Rabbi Akiva was the great rabbi that lived in the time of the Roman persecution. So the story is told in Bereshis Rabbah, quote, Rabbi Akiva sat and expounded, but the congregation drowsed. His students were just not interested. He sought to arouse them. He said, Why was Esther worthy to reign over 127 provinces? Let Esther, a granddaughter of Sarah, who lived 127 years, come and reign over 127 provinces. So his story is like this. He's giving a lecture, Rabbi Akiva. His students are not that engaged. And he's trying to figure out a way to wake them up. So he says, why did Esther rule over 127 provinces? Because of Sarah, who lived under 27 years. So he makes that connection. So the question number one is, what is that connection? What's the meaning of that? Who cares? How do you make the connection? And a second question you could ask is, why would that be something that would arouse the students? So the first answer is, Sarah lived all her years perfectly. And so in Paro's palace and Avram's tent, she was holy, and it was in the merits of her life, it was because of her perfect spiritual life that Esther grew in stature to where she was merited that 127 provinces. Okay. There's another reason, which is that Esther lived in a time of a similar time of darkness. Hashem's face was hidden from Bnei Israel. We call it a generation of Hester Panim. There was a hidden face of God, right? The face of God was hidden. And so Sarah was serving as an inspiration to Esther that in dark times, in difficult times, you can surmount the darkness. Don't fear the exile of the Jews. Don't fear your marriage to Achashverosh. Sarah also sort of faced the possible rape of herself by Paro when they went down to Egypt. So it was sort of a message to Esther. Now, the second question as to why this... In difficult times, you should be strong. The lesson of Sarah was, look, Sarah did very difficult things in her life. I just mentioned two of them. She faced rape, possible rape. She found the strength to say, you're not going to get a child from me, and so therefore, take Hagar in marriage and have a child for her. Think about what personal courage that must have taken, right? And then to say after your husband has this child Ishmael, and then you have your own child Yitzchak, but then to see that there's something going on between these two, Yitzchak and Ishmael, that is not good for Yitzchak, and Yitzchak is known to be at this point the spiritual inheritor of the Jewish people, and to stand up to Abraham and to say your favorite son has to be out of this house. I mean, that's a very difficult thing to do. I mean, she was right, and like I said, but Abraham didn't believe her. He had to be told by Hashem, listen to her, she was right. So there were difficult times that she faced, and the strength that she showed in her life served as an inspiration to Esther. Esther also faced a tremendous test. She had to go to the palace of the king, where the king spent one night with each girl, right, to see if this was She had to be separated from her uncle/husband, or cousin/husband, Mordechai. She had to be, she was the queen in the palace, but had she been found out to be a Jew, she would have been killed. All these things that she faced, and then the difficulty and the tragedy of the decree against the Jews, and what should she do? And she didn't want to go to the king; she'd be killed. And Mordechai says, "You have to go to the." So she faced similar challenges, difficult challenges. So that's why Sarah was sort of inspiration to her. So now we come to the second question, which is, why would this story be such an inspiration to the students to wake them up from their drowsing? So you can give a couple of answers here. One would be that the point of delineating her years is to drive home the point that Sarah didn't waste 1 minute of her years, right? That was the point of the pasuk. That 127 years was like each year was she used all her time well. So Rabbi Akiva was sort of exhorting, trying to impress on his students, time is precious. Don't waste these moments here. Look at Sarah. Look what she was able to accomplish. She was a tremendous figure. But also, Rabbi Akiva lived in dark times, just like Esther. At this point in history, the Romans had conquered the land. They had destroyed the second Beis HaMikdash. They had put down the Bar Kokhba rebellion. They had outlawed the study of Torah, for which later Rabbi Akiva would suffer a martyr's death. He would be tortured to death, right? The students had fallen prey to this darkness, and it was, they were uninterested, because when you're uninterested or bored with what you're doing, it's because you find no meaning in it, right? Like, if it's meaningful, you don't get bored. But if you're bored, it means there's some malaise, there's something going on underneath the surface that they just didn't feel connected to the study, because maybe they felt like separated from God. Maybe they thought that their work was to no purpose. And so he was saying, look, Esther lived through this. We also have to be like Esther. We have to live. We can't despair. We have to forge on ahead. We know that even though Hashem's hiding his face from us, he's here and he's with us, So that was the connection between Sarah and Esther. Okay. I want to make an interesting point about Sarah's death as well. I told you about the Midrash that says that the Satan came to Sarah and told her that Abraham had killed Yitzchak. So according to the Midrash, she burst into a fit of crying, and she first cried 3 long sounds, like we sound the shofar, the tekiah, oh, like that. Mm-hmm. So she did 3 of those, and then she sobbed 3 shorter sounds, like the teruah, and then she died. So the Midrash HaGadol says, therefore, we make similar blasts on Rosh Hashanah to how she cried before she died, so that her cries should be an atonement for us. We often hear,
That's why we do that?
This is what the Midrash HaGadol says, yeah. That's one reason. So we're often told that the Akedas Yitzchak is supposed to be the reminder for Hashem. In other words, that we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Why? Because of the shofar that was there at the Akedah, right? The ram that got caught in the bushes, right? we're told that we're trying to remind Hashem of Yitzchak's sacrifice and Abraham's sacrifice, that they were willing to give the life of Yitzchak for Hashem, and that's correct. But we never hear about this side of it. This is about how we're trying to arouse Hashem's sympathy for us through Sarah's pain. Right? Yeah. It's interesting little thing. And another midrash, by the way, it's not the Satan who tells Sarah, it's Yitzchak himself who comes home, says, Mommy, I was going to be killed. And the, combination of horror, shock, and relief killed her. And in another midrash yet, what happens is the Satan goes to Sarah, tells her that Yitzchak's going to be killed. She doesn't die, but she gets so distraught that she starts wandering around and asking people, what do you know of Yitzchak? Have you seen Yitzchak? What happened with Yitzchak? Nobody can satisfy her. And she's like wandering in a daze. And the Satan comes back and says, I was just kidding. He's still alive. And then because of either, again, shock, horror, dazing, joy, relief, she dies. So it's interesting. Okay, so that's Sarah's death. All right. So now we come to the next event. Is Eliezer is tasked with finding a wife for Yitzchak. He prays to God. He says, please give me a sign that I'm going to be able to find the right girl. In other words, he's going to stand by the well. His plan is he's going to stand at this place. He's going to look at the maidens, and he's going to say, okay, can you give me a little bit of a drink? And the right woman, the right girl is going to say, is going to show through some sign that Hashem is going to help him see that she's the right one, that she has a tremendous amount of chesed. So I want to just go through very briefly the text and then go through each element of her response to Eliezer that all the commentators pick apart. They pick them apart and say, she did this, and it means that, and this is the meaning behind what she said, all in praise of Rivka, right? So very briefly, he hasn't finished speaking to Hashem, he's saying a prayer, and Rivka comes out. She had a very comely appearance, she was pretty, she was a virgin, and no man had known her, had been intimate with her. And no, strictly speaking, the text says no man had known her. She goes down to the fountain, she fills her pitcher, and she went up. The servant ran toward her, Eliezer, and says, "Please let me sip a little from your pitcher." She says, "Drink, my lord." And she hastened and lowered her pitcher to her hand, and she gave him to drink. And she finished giving him to drink, and she said, "I will also draw for your camels," right, which was his test, "until they will have finished drinking." And she hastened, and she emptied her pitcher into the trough. She ran again to the well to draw water, and she drew for all his camels. The man was astonished at her. Clearly, this is the girl he's looking for. And standing silent, and he's just waiting to see what happens. When it came about, the camels had finished drinking. He takes a golden nose ring, which weighs a beka, which means half a shekel, and 2 bracelets for her hands, weighing 10 gold shekels. That was the style. That was the style.
It is again. Now.
It is again. See how things come around? And then they talk, and he asks her, "Whose daughter are you? Where are you from?" And she says, "I'm the daughter of Besuel." And then she says, "Come, I'll lodge you and your camels." So the commentators give a lot of praise for Rivka based on this little incident. So let's go through one by one. The text says she was a virgin whom no man had known, right? So it seems a little redundant. Rashi says it's a little redundant here. If she's a virgin, obviously no man had known her or been intimate with her. Rashi, there's three explanations for this. Three explanations. One is that apparently in this time, heathen maidens could be virgins, but they might have also fooled around a little bit. So that's what they could have still been, intimate with a man in other ways. She was not. So that's why it's not redundant. Hirsch says it means that she was so modest that no man had dared to become friendly with her. They stayed away because they recognized this was a special girl. This was a girl you don't mess around with in any way. Another interpretation is that no one recognized her righteous nature. Nobody really knew who she was. Nobody knew who this girl was in terms of her spiritual stature. And how did she? Yeah. That's just explaining. They're just explaining why the redundancy.
How does that affect?
Nobody knew. In other words, nobody recognized in her. She was so reserved that nobody knew her well enough to know this is a special person.
How does that fit with being with a man?
They're not. It's a different explanation. A completely different explanation. Okay. How did she prove equal to his test? So let's go through what happens. She says, the first thing she says is, "Drink, my lord." Now, he had asked for a sip, just a sip. He says, "Please let me sip a little water from your pitcher." And she answers, "Drink." So the commentators say, this means she's saying, here's more than a sip. Drink as much as you want, in other words. Okay? In addition, she says, "My lord." Now, he's dressed as a servant. She doesn't know him, and yet she's giving him the respect. Okay? Then she lowers her jug. She lowered her pitcher to her hand. She was carrying it on her shoulder, and she lowers it to her hand. Instead of just tipping it over or letting him take it, she's the one that does it for him. Then it says, when she finished... Now, what does it say here? Gave him to drink. When she finished giving him to drink, she then said, so the commentators say, she doesn't speak until he was finished drinking, because she didn't want him to have to answer and risk choking. Okay, so they're very, very considerate. Okay. She also waited, because his test was, right, if a girl comes and says, "Drink and I'll water your camels also," right? She says, "Drink." Then after he finishes, she then says, "I'll also draw for your camels." And the commentators say she waited to say, "and also for your camels," because she didn't want to equate him with the camels. In other words, he's not on the same level. So had she said, "Oh, I'll give you and your camels to drink," right? You're all the same. So she's giving him a little stature that, okay. In addition, another reason that they said that she waited is because had she said, drink and I'll water your camels also, it would be a form of boasting, right? I'm going to do that for you. I'll take care of you. Whereas if she just says right before she does the action, it's like, I'm just going to tell you now what I'm doing, rather than I'm boasting about what I'm going to tell you later. So they're really picking apart all her words here. They can't heap enough praises on Rivka. She offers to draw the water for the camels, right? Rather than give the water to the camels, rather than give them to drink, which suggested compassion. If she were to give them directly, then which one would she do first? There's 10 camels. So one of them would drink and the other 9 would be thirsty. So that's why she drew the water for them, poured it into the trough, let them all drink at the same time, right? And in addition, there's 3 terms that tell us that she was running to do the mitzvah. It says she hastened to lower the pitcher. She hastened again in another verse, and then she ran again to the well. So she's running to do this mitzvah. That's right. She's running to do this mitzvah. Keep in mind, by the way, that 10 camels would drink about 140 gallons of water. So she's running back and forth to fill her pitcher. 40 gallons. They're in the desert. They've made a trip, and now they're going to be making a trip back. They have to store up. It's a lot of water. Now, the Torah also recounts, and notice that when I went through the psukim, it talked about the gifts that Eliezer gives her, right? And the commentators say that the amounts that are specified is specific for symbolic reasons. The nose ring that he gave her weighs half a shekel, right? And this is, they say, referring to the half shekel that each Jew donated upon being counted in the census. So the remez, the sort of hint here, was that she's so righteous, she's going to be the matriarch of a nation that is going to accept the Torah and donate the half shekel. So that's again a remez to her, a hint to her worthiness to be the matriarch of Bnei Israel. Then it says he gave her 2 bracelets on her arms, and that symbolizes the 2 stone tablets. And then it says the value of the bracelets are 10 gold shekels, was their weight, symbolizing the 10 commandments. Okay, so
say that last part again.
The 10 gold shekels was the value of the bracelets, indicating the 10 commandments. Okay. By the way, there's a very interesting little side note here that I know you'll appreciate. It says later when Eliezer goes into the house and talks with her father and her brother, Lavan, about taking her back to be the maid of Yitzchak. So they say, let's call Rivka and ask her. They bring, in other words, ask her if it's okay, does she want to go with them. They bring her and they say, do you want to go with this man? And she gives her consent. And from here, we learn that a woman cannot be married against her consent. From Rivka, from this incident. Okay. Yeah, sure. It's from Rivka that we learn of the rule that a girl cannot be married against her wishes.
But why?
Because her father and brother call her into the tent and they say to her, do you agree to go with this man? Okay. So this is where we learn this from, that we should never force a woman against her will. I mean, Lavan and her father Basul were not spiritual, great people. And even they recognized that they wanted to ask her. Okay, so now the trip back. So Rivka goes to Eliezer. They pack up the camels, they go back. They're going to meet Yitzchak. So they're on the way back, and as they near the place where Yitzchak is, she sees, Rivka's on top of the camel, she sees what looks like a holy man in the field who's praying. Right, Yitzchak is davening at this point. And she asks Eliezer, who is this man? And Eliezer says, this is my master, this is Yitzchak. And she falls off the camel and covers up herself with a shawl. Okay, so very interesting. This is from the Netziv, who was a 19th century commentator. He says this reaction. He says something's going on here. She fell off the camel out of fear and awe, right? She didn't exactly know what she feared. She just recognized this was some special person. And then she asks Eliezer who this is, and then she covers up. She covers herself up out of modesty, out of shame, reverence, as if she realized she's not worthy of being his wife. Covering herself up with the veil, says the Netziv, is emblematic of the relationship between Yitzchak and Rivka. That there was this unique kind of relationship between Yitzchak and Rivka that there wasn't between Avram and Sarah, or Yaakov and Rachel, or even Yaakov and Leah. That from this moment on, there was sort of a barrier between the two, between Yitzchak and Rivka. The Netziv says Sarah and Abraham, Rachel with Yaakov, they felt equal to their husbands, and they never feared to confront them with complaints or criticism. But Rivka, right? So we talked about Sarah. She confronted Abraham about when it came time to to banish Hagar and Yishmael. Rachel, she comes to Yaakov. She complains to him, "Give me a child," when she's barren. She comes to him to complain. Why can't you do something? I want a child. David Hashem. But when it comes to Rivka and Yitzchak, right? So she did not confront him, right? The couple of times, look, when Yitzchak was older, he preferred Esav, right? She knew that Esav was deceiving his father. She knew Esav was not the one who should be the spiritual inheritor of Abraham's legacy. But she didn't say anything at that point, okay? When it came time to acting, what she knew to be what Hashem wanted of her, by the way, right? To somehow make Yitzchak give the bracha to Yaakov rather than Esav, she doesn't confront him like Sarah confronted Abraham. She does it secretly, and she does it surreptitiously, and she does it deceptively, right? She tells Yaakov the whole charade about dressing up as Esav. Yitzchak is blind, so he won't know the difference. Right, exactly. So it's subterfuge. So there's a difference in the type of relationship here, which is I thought was very interesting. Now, the last part of the parsha is that Yitzchak brings. What happens is Yitzchak greets Rivka. The pasuk says that Yitzchak brings her into what seems to be Sarah's tent. I say seems to be because we're going to discuss that pasuk in a minute. Then he marries her, and then she became his wife, and he loved her, and he is consoled for his mother. So let's see what's going on here, okay? The pasuk says, and Yitzchak brought her to the tent of Sarah, his mother, and he took Rivka, and she became his wife, and he loved her. And Yitzchak was comforted for the loss of his mother. Now, there's a little bit going on here that's a little interesting here. The rabbis comment that the word that is used to describe Yitzchak bringing Rivka into the tent is a little odd. It says like this: Vayivi eha Yitzchak ha'ohala Sarah imo. The word ha'ohala really means to her tent, right? And the rabbis say it can't mean the tent of Sarah, which is the next phrase. It means to her tent, which is sort of like a phrase unto itself. Had it meant that he brought her into Sarah's tent, it would have used a different word for ohel. It would have said he brought her into ha'ohel Sarah imo. But it says ha'ohel la Sarah imo, which means he brought her into her tent, and then the pasuk continues Sarah imo. It's a little bit oddly phrased. So they're saying here that the idea that he brought her into a tent must somehow be separate from Sarah, his mother. Two separate phrases. So what does this mean? So the first step is he brought her into the tent, and then Sarah, his mother. She was like Sarah, his mother. So what does this mean she was like Sarah's mother? It must mean there was something that happened in between bringing her into the tent, right? Something that happened in the tent that made Rivka seem like Sarah, his mother. And what was that? So what do we know about Sarah's tent? Do you remember? What about it?
Well, the bread was always fresh.
Right, her bread was fresh from one Friday to the next. That was one of 3 miracles regarding her tent.
So when Sarah died, that was it. And then when Rivka came,
Right. So let's go back to the challah. There were 3 things that sort of made Sarah's tent special and miraculous. One was the challah, the bread. Do you know the other 2 things? So the other 2 things that were miraculous in her tent was her Shabbos candles. When she lit Shabbos candles on Friday night, they remained lit all week until the following Friday. And the third miracle was that there was a cloud that hovered above her tent. Okay, so these 3 things were obviously the mark of a spiritual greatness. They were not in Abraham's merit at all. It was all Sarah's merit, right? And these miracles also, by the way, parallel miracles that happened in the Mishkan in the desert, as well as the temple in Jerusalem. You had the showbreads, right? The lechem apanim, they were also fresh from week to week. You had the cloud in the desert, the anan, that protected the Jewish people, right? And that represented Hashem's presence. And you had lights in the temple, the western lamp called the Ner Hamaravi, and it also burned longer than the others. It was the first lit and the last to go out. And this sort of symbolized bringing, the holiness from one day to the next. And so with Sarah also, it represented the fact that her candles were lit throughout the week, what represented that the holiness of Shabbos didn't abate just because Shabbos was over. Her holiness also lasted into the week, right? So when Rivka came, right, these miracles, as you said, they returned. Okay, Uncle says, quote, and Yitzchak brought her to the tent, and behold, her deeds were as righteous as the works of Sarah his mother, and he loved her. So, and according to Zohar, by the way, when Yitzchak brought her into the tent, the image of Sarah reappeared. Okay, so as
what does that mean?
An image of Sarah appeared. Whatever you understand that to mean, it could be. So, meaning that he knew that she was the right one, but he also saw that the miracles returned. So therefore, the order of events in the pasuk, he brings her into a tent. He sees that she's righteous because the miracles returned, which means she's as righteous as Sarah. Then he marries her, and then he can be consoled for his mother's death because he knows she's the right one. She's the right one. Bereshis Rabbah. I'm going to just quote the Gemara that tells us about the miracles. All the years that Sarah lived, a cloud hung by the entrance to her tent. As soon as she died, the cloud left. But as soon as Rivka came, that cloud returned. All the years that Sarah lived, the doors were wide open to welcome visitors. A blessing was dispatched to her dough. The lamp would burn from Shabbos Eve to the next. As soon as Rivka came, it all returned. As soon as Yitzchak saw that, she did as his mother did. Immediately Torah relates, Yitzchak brought her to the tent. In other words, he first saw that she was worthy. Okay, so he didn't marry her until the miracles returned. Okay, now.
Wasn't that pretty instantaneous?
What?
Wasn't that pretty instantaneous that they returned?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure.
Sarah died when Rivka.
How long ago? I'm not sure of the exact amount of time. It's very difficult to ascertain sometimes in the Chumash, but I can find out because I'm guessing it's not that long because the pasuk says, and Yitzchak was consoled on his mother's death.
Well, she had him when she was 199.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
She died when she was 127.
Mm-hmm. He was 37. They established that that Yitzchak was 37 at the Akedah. No, I think it was longer. So I'll have to look. Time between Sarah's death and marrying
I'm just
Rivka.
curious, like the lapse in the miracles, like how long was? I don't know. Like, don't kill yourself.
No, it's fine. There's answers to these. It's not a problem.
Okay, I relationship, and I'm wondering.
The what? The barrier?
The shawl represented a barrier in the relationship, which I think needs a little bit.
Wait, say that again?
When she saw Yitzhak in the field, she fell off her camel, and then she covered herself with a shawl.
Okay.
And that represents...
According to one commentary.
Right.
According to one commentary.
Do others agree with that?
He's a much later 19th century, quite recent. So it's not like there's a...
That they didn't discuss the problems with
Esau. Right.
Esau.
Mm-hmm.
That to me seems a little odd too, that there was not that.
Well, that's the point.
But why?
Why?
That's my question. Why?
I mean,
this is what it was.
Ultimately, it was because Hashem decided that the way the blessings had to be transferred was through deception. Why that's the case, I can look into that as well. And next week is the parsha with.
Haven't we all been deceptive with our husbands in some way for what we believe is a higher good? You know?
And why? Why do we do that?
We buy a new washing machine without asking them because we don't want them to say no, and we know we need it. And I mean,
it's also possible. Yes, we do. I'm going to ascribe more lofty motives to Rivka here. And again, this is going to come into play next week and the following week when we discuss the actual action. We can talk a lot about that, and we'll find a lot of commentaries on it. But I'm going to tell you that I it's quite possible. Again, this was all with the haskama of Hashem, all the approval. God wanted it this way. Now, why did God want it this way? I don't know. Again, we can get into that next week. One thing I can guess at and surmise is that it was due to Yitzchak's blindness, figurative blindness about Esav. In other words, that perhaps had he tried to be persuaded by Rivka, had Rivka gone to him and said, look, I know you love Esav, but he's really fooling you. He's not good, right? He's not as good as you think he is. Had he been persuaded to give Yaakov the blessing instead of Esav, which is a real long shot anyway, but had he been persuaded, maybe it wouldn't have been the same quality of bracha, right? In other words, when Yitzchak gave Yaakov the bracha, it was with whole heart because he thought it was Esav. And had he given the bracha to Yaakov, it would have been grudgingly. And so maybe there would have been something missing from that bracha that Yaakov was destined to get. You know what I'm saying? Okay. One last thing I want to talk about is that is comparing Sarah and Rivka. It's interesting, by the way, that the Torah records the birth of Rivka in the previous parsha, right before the death of Sarah, to draw attention to the fact that we have a tradition that says that a tzaddik or a righteous person is not taken away before their replacement is put on earth. Okay, and we get that from a verse in Ecclesiastes that says the sun rises and the sun sets. So first we're given something and then it's taken away. So again, because both of them were righteous, Rivka had to be born and then Sarah could die. Okay, now again, it's important to understand that the two women seem to be very different personalities. But the Torah wants to impress upon us that they were doing the right thing for their time and for their circumstances, right? So it looks like on the surface of it, right, that Rivka is all, as we said, deception and quietness and not confrontational, right? She doesn't confront Yitzchak the way Sarah confronts Abraham about Hagar and Ishmael. And so Sarah was strong and decisive. Rivka doesn't seem to be. But again, the story about Yitzchak not marrying Rivka till he saw that she was like his mother shows us that she is like Sarah, right? It's just, again, each woman did what they knew had to be done in the way that that the action had to be done. Again, we'll talk more about this next week. So, in other words, the essence of a person who's wise, right, is doing something in the way that they need to do it. as you said, there are times when we have to take certain roads. We may have, again, lesser motives than Rivka did, but Midrash Tanchuma says that part of Avram's eulogy for Sarah, when he gave a eulogy for her, part of that was the verse that we know from the poem, The Woman of Valor, Darshat Semer Fishtim. She seeks out wool and linen. And so what's the point here that Avram was making with Sarah? What's the point of mentioning the wool and linen? We talked about this when we discussed the Eshes Chayil poem. Wool and linen are two things we're not allowed to wear together, right? We can't combine them. And so, just as they're forbidden in combination, Sarah also knew the two elements here, the Ishmael and the Yitzchak, are bad in combination, right? So Avram was essentially praising her that she saw these two things had to be separated when he couldn't see it, right? He was blind to that. He was blind to the quote-unquote shotness, the wool and linen combination in his home, right? And so Sarah had to, you can't, it's not right to say Sarah didn't have compassion in that situation. She did what she had to do. She was forceful and she did what she had to do. She had the strength. Rivka was in a very similar situation, as we'll see. There's two forces here. There was Yaakov and Esau, very opposite qualities. And she also saw they cannot exist together. We have to send Yaakov away. This is not good. She saw also what her husband did not see. But she acted differently, again, because for whatever reason, reasons we'll get into, but just the fact that she didn't quite act the way Sarah did with Avram in this case doesn't mean she was any less forceful or any less righteous. So, and yeah, interesting, right? Fascinating stuff.